Welcome. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Metropolitan Water District Representatives Caucus and Special Meeting of the Board of Directors for the West Basin Municipal Water District, May 7th, 2025. It is now 12:32. I'm calling this meeting to order. Mr. General Manager, do we have a quorum?
I'll call roll call. Director Tommy Favai. Here. Director Desi Alvarez. Director Scott Houston. Director Don Deere. Here. President Gloria Gray.
Here.
Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Item 3, public comment. Do we have anyone from the public who wishes to comment?
Madam President, we've not received any requests for public comment here in the building, though this meeting is being held both in person and virtually. If there's any member of the public that would like to speak, please indicate so by raising your virtual hand. And President Gray, I do not see a request.
Thank you very much. Item 4, discussion items. Go to item 4A. Would you please introduce this item, Mr. General Manager?
Yes, President Gray, I'm very happy to introduce this. For some time now, Metropolitan Water District had been discussing the climate adaptation master plan for water 5-year implementation strategy. This has taken months and months and months of work, not only on Metropolitan Water District staff's behalf, but of course, the member agencies as well. And I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today because I think not only did she lead the effort, but I can only imagine the amount of work that you've put into it. And now to see it adopted by the Board of Directors, I think it's quite an achievement. So I'm excited to introduce Liz Croton, this Chief Sustainability, Resilience, and Innovation Officer of Metropolitan Water District, here to present on the Camp for Water program. I'll throw that over to you.
Thank you, EJ, and good afternoon, President Gray and members of the board. It's a pleasure to be in the room with you all and to share with you the progress that we've made on the Climate Adaptation Master Plan for Water. So as your general manager noted, the board our Metropolitan District Board unanimously approved a 5-year implementation strategy on April 8th. And that approval it kind of means two things. One, it was the culmination of a 2-year planning process. And 2, it lays out the next steps for implementation over the next 5 years. So I'm going to go through just a little bit of the background. I've been here before, so I think that you're familiar with the planning process. Next slide, please. So I just always like to start with kind of why we came together to address climate adaptation at Metropolitan. And, I think that we all recognize that we're seeing more immediate impacts from climate change. And we certainly have been planning for drought cycles for a long time at Metropolitan and within our member agencies. But we also started to see some additional impacts. So, this process really started, I think there were a few different catalysts, I would say. One of them was the fact that in that 21-22 time period, we saw, 3 years of consecutive low allocations from the State Water Project. We had an area of our service area, the State Water Dependent area that was under mandatory restriction when the rest of our service area was not. And that was unprecedented and really unacceptable to Metropolitan and to our board. And so it was one of the impetus for coming together in Temecula in February of 2023. And I remember your general manager was there and your board members to talk about how we were going to approach our long-term planning in the face of climate change. So we gave a pretty robust view of all the different ways that climate impacts were impacting Metropolitan's operations, our resources, our workforce, and all these impacts you see up here on the screen have real life impacts and already had real life impacts onto our operations. So this was part of the impetus to integrate our long-term water resources planning with climate planning, with financial planning, and with infrastructure planning so we could be as prepared in the future as possible. Next slide. Please. And before I go on to what we call the Camp for Water, I did just want to mention that Metropolitan is looking at our climate strategy in a holistic way. We see our climate work on two sides of a coin. One is this adaptation work that we're talking about today in Camp for Water to address immediate impacts. But of course, we're also working on the climate mitigation side. So we're looking for ways to reduce our own contribution to climate change by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We have a climate action plan. We just put out our third annual report on Earth Day on April 22nd, if you haven't seen it. And that's mostly about how we're shifting our electricity use to more renewables and some of the actions that we're taking to reduce our emissions in our daily operations. And next slide, please. This is about the climate action plan. We have a goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. This is in line with state targets. And we have a series of measures that we'll take over the next 20 years in order to meet that carbon neutrality goal. And I encourage you, if you haven't seen our climate action plan, take a look. Next slide, please. So on to Camp for Water. So Camp for Water really, again, is about integrating the way we do water resources, infrastructure, climate, and financial planning. Our water resources team has been doing integrated water resources planning since 1996, and very successfully has been able to map out, some of the potential uncertainties to address our supply and demand needs in a 20 to 25-year time frame. But this time, we actually approached it a little bit differently. Instead of kind of looking at one potential future, we're really looking at a range of potential futures because of the uncertainty around climate change. And so that's where water resources is really matching up with this climate planning. And we're looking at not only the resources that we might need, but how we might change our infrastructure, the way it operates, or the mechanisms themselves in order to ensure they're resilient in the long term. And then, of course, we have to figure out how we're going to pay for it. And so our board was really adamant that we needed to include and integrate our financial planning, our long-term financial planning into our planning. So this graphic, this wheel, is really meant to represent the steps of climate adaptation that we will continuously take at Metropolitan. And this isn't, something that we created from scratch necessarily. This is the best practice when it comes to climate adaptation planning, to assess risks, to set targets and goals, to identify strategies to meet those goals, to evaluate them and to integrate them into our efforts. And then, of course, to always monitor and report. And that monitoring and reporting is critical to the adaptive management for us to be able to pivot if conditions on the ground look different than what we had anticipated. Next slide, please. And next slide. So we really wanted to emphasize, because I think when we started this planning process, people were like, okay, well, what's the plan going to be? Are you going to tell us what projects to do, and when are we going to do those projects? And, what is the plan? And I think that we, over the course of the last couple of years, really reached a common understanding that we don't necessarily want to make all of our decisions for the next 20 years right now. That the best way for us to move forward is to create an adaptive process. So it's not going to be a master plan, a set of binders that sits on the shelf. It's going to be an iterative process where we can kind of check information and improve it over time. It has to be adaptive to adjust to whatever's happening on the ground. Is population doing what we think it is? The economy doing what we think it is? Is climate change performing in a way that meets the commitments that we've made globally or doesn't? And so we have to be adaptive and be able to adjust and pivot. This really is an innovative way of looking at our planning at Metropolitan in a way that really promotes kind of a comprehensive look at our projects. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about these kind of highlighted elements here of Camp for Water. One is what I mentioned earlier about updating data annually, tracking signposts, and making sure that the board is informed for decision making. And then also standardizing the way that we assess projects and programs using a set of evaluative criteria that our board and member agencies developed. The other thing that I think is innovative about Camp for Water is that it was collaboratively developed with the board and with member agencies. So our board developed a task force made up of board members and of member agencies so that we could all work together, the board being kind of the policymakers and decision makers, but our member agencies really having that on the ground expertise, day-to-day knowledge of managing water systems and addressing these immediate threats. And so I do think that's a unique attribute and helped us get to this point in the process. Next slide, please. So again, it's not your typical master plan, but this slide is really meant to incorporate or demonstrate the different components of what the master plan is. So again, these aren't binder volumes, they are elements of this overall strategy. And what you see in the light blue box is really the implementation strategy components, and that's what the board approved on April 8th. So our board approved those components. They approved the time-bound targets, which lay out what we think we want to plan for when it comes to water resources and other elements. The board approved a policy framework that lays out some high-level policies that can guide staff actions and initiatives. And the board approved some implementation timelines. So you'll see at the back of the implementation strategy, over the next 5 years, all the different projects we anticipate reviewing and all of the different studies and initiatives and planning processes that are important to climate adaptation. So it really shows the breadth of activity at Metropolitan. You can see there's activities from finance and activities in our water resources group and engineering and our DEI group. So and sustainability, so that all these things are kind of integrated into one place. And then it also includes the decision-making framework, which is how we're gonna assess projects and programs. So we have these 6 evaluative criteria that we've developed, so that every project will be evaluated according to its reliability, its resilience, its financial sustainability, its adaptability, its environmental co-benefits, and its equity implications. And those were really important evaluative criteria for our board to see. And I will mention that right now we've just kicked off this week our newly formed Camp for Water assessment team. So this is made up of staff at Metropolitan from the different groups that will be assessing at least 4 different assessments this year. So we're going to be looking at Pure Water, Southern California. We're going to be looking at the Delta Conveyance Project, Sites Reservoir, as well as our Conservation and Efficiency Program, and probably a couple others. So we have started this process. Next slide, please. So I want to mention, I have a few more slides just to give you one more level of detail on some of these issues. One is this planning for uncertainty, and this has been one of the biggest challenges, I think, throughout the last 2 years. This process is trying to get people as comfortable as possible with planning under extreme uncertainty. And it's a really uncomfortable place to be, to not know, not have a good sense of exactly where we're headed. But our water resources team, for the first time in their IRP processes in 2020, started using scenario planning. So instead of just looking towards one particular future, they're looking at a range of 4 potential futures, so that we can actually plan between, really low demands in the future versus really high demands, really severe climate change versus more moderate climate change, so that we can actually have a better sense of the range of options, the range of needs that we might need to meet. And that's been a really important learning process for everyone to get comfortable with planning towards these needs. And it's how we set our time-bound targets. So our time-bound targets are at the worst case scenario right now. And many of you know that means that when you look at our targets, it says we may need 650,000 acre feet by 2045. That is the outer bounds. And we don't say we're going to implement that much. We merely say we're going to identify that much so that we have the options as we monitor the conditions to help the board make decisions. That's really what those targets are all about. And it's necessary to really prevent what is truly the worst case scenario, which is not being prepared at all. So that's the way that we're using these scenarios right now. And we will update the assumptions underlying the data underlying these scenarios on an annual basis. And if needed, we will change and revise the scenarios on a 5-year cycle if we see that things are really different than we thought they were. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to just give you a little bit more detail on how we're evaluating projects under the Camp for Water process. These are those 6 evaluative criteria. And as I mentioned, we're going to be comprehensively looking at Delta Conveyance, Pure Water, Sites Reservoir, and Conservation and Efficiency Program. And I encourage you to look at the way our assessment form. It has a lot of detailed questions and information. It also has an accompanying guidance document that helps staff kind of walk through step by step how to answer these questions. And this isn't determinative. This will not say this is a good project or this is a bad project. It will evaluate all these criteria, give it sort of a color-coded value on that 5-point scale. And that's information for the board to use to make decisions. So it's really meant to be informative, not determinative. Next slide, please. And sort of the last kind of guiding part of the implementation strategy is this policy framework. So we have 5 kind of overarching policies around these 5 priorities of our board. And this is really what's going to guide additional studies and planning and initiatives and programs at the staff level. So this really tells staff, hey, on resilience, you need to integrate climate risk and vulnerability for all hazards, not just drought, and you need to use the best available science. Next slide, please. And so you can see under resilience here, this is just an example of some of the initiatives that may come out of a policy statement like this. We are working on resilient infrastructure guidelines, so changing our design guidelines to make sure they think about climate impacts like fire and extreme heat, flooding. We are comprehensively assessing our power system vulnerabilities in the CRA and throughout the system. We're also looking at workforce safety measures around things like heat, and we've already had initiated some fire management planning related to our critical facilities so that we can harden those facilities, change our landscaping guidelines to be more resistant to fire. Next slide. So I think I'll probably just end here. And this is, again, that same kind of wheel from the beginning. And this is, one of the more critical parts of this whole process is the fact that we'll be providing an annual report on the data, on the progress, so that our board and our member agencies can track this information and we can make any necessary adjustments that we need to. We did produce our first annual report already, so that is accessible. We produced that in February, and we will continue to do that on an annual basis. I'm happy to answer any questions.
We gone over that report already? As a board?
I don't know if we've necessarily gone through the report.
Okay.
Would you like to more detail on any of it?
Are there any questions, Liz? Liz, I'm sorry. Did you finish your presentation? I can't hear.
Yes, I did.
Oh, thank you.
Do you have any?
Are there any questions? Go on.
None.
No questions?
I guess not. No question.
President Gray, I had a question, or maybe just clarification, because I think that one of the things that you said, I think could address any concerns, which is that this process and the scoring that you evaluate is supposed to be informative to the board of directors.
Determinative.
Determinative.
Which I really had
And so, this will be the process at Metropolitan Water District, I think, revolutionizes kind of the process in which recommendations get brought to the board, because there'll be an evaluation and kind of that thorough process for board members, new and those that have been on the board for some time. I mean, it's a lot of information to evaluate. So how do you see this evolving into the future as far as they're going to be brought back to the board every few years, or how will this be updated?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, the implementation strategy is meant to be a 5-year implementation strategy. So I think that assumes that we will come back and revisit that portion of it in 5 years. But as far as the assessments go, right now, the way we're envisioning it is that, we want to be really transparent with the board, especially on these first ones, especially because they're big projects that are really important to evaluate. And so our goal is to bring those assessments to the board, likely in 3 phases. So we're looking at a preliminary set of assessments in July. And then coming back in likely September with some refinements, and then by the end of the year, having some, pretty close to final assessments. But it's really important to note that we have a lot of information for a project like Pure Water that's about to release its DEIR. But DCP, the Delta Conveyance Project, is still undergoing, some of its permitting processes. So we don't have all the data yet. So we'll just have to assess it to the best of our ability based on the information that we have. And we'll just have to share, which assumptions we're making in terms of the future operations, and some of the, assumptions related to the outcomes of those regulatory processes. So in addition to coming to the board with those assessments, then when the board is asked to make a decision on a project, let's use Pure Water for an example, that'll be the first one in January or February of 2026. Like always, Metropolitan staff will produce, a staff report, a board letter, and the assessment from Camp for Water will be an attachment to that will comprehensively look at a project and any other sort of supporting documents that we need to include for the board to make a decision. But that's the idea, is that these Camp for Water assessments will become a standardized way of looking at these investments to help the board. And then as far as overall implementation of CAMP, I anticipate doing, either quarterly or biannual updates to the board, just so they can keep track of how we're doing. But on May 27th, the task force is meeting with the vice chairs. It's a public meeting to talk about kind of what the board's oversight is going to be moving forward. So that will also be pretty informative.
Thank you, Liz. Any more questions? Well,
Gloria, one of the staff members has a question.
yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. This is Gus from West Basin. Yeah, Liz, I have a question. Can you share? Can you?
Well, enough so Gloria can hear you.
Yes. Can you share with us, Liz, how like legislation is captured, say for water use efficiency with like the new regulations? Is that like supporting document, or is that assessed somewhere in the process?
So we talked a lot about this during the process, actually, and we certainly are aware of it when we look at some of our anticipated or targeted conservation. We have a target around reducing our water use by 300,000 acre feet, and that's really based on an assessment that we did with regards to non-functional turf in our service area. But regulations like conservation as a way of life, that's going to have to be one of those signposts that we track, because the regulation is only as effective as its implementation. And so we really need to see kind of how that plays out. But that will certainly be a piece of our monitoring piece.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
My opinion, my preference is that the reports be quarterly, but I realize also that takes effort from on your part, on your committee and so on. I won't take too much away from you. But it would be better to have more frequent reports, but
Yeah.
whatever works out in the long run is fine.
How much
Okay,
the
any
board wants
further
to hear
questions?
from me.
Chair, great. I have
Board wants to
a
hear-
question.
Yes, go right ahead.
Thank you. I have a question on the, it mentions like the battery storage stuff and ZEV, and have you had these technologies or, information and, prior, clean air adaptation master plan? Or does this just comes up when, when you have these type of technologies that come out?
Yeah, well, so our board approved our climate action plan, which is around reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in 2022. So we've been working on that stuff for a while. And even before that, we had invested in solar. We have solar farms at 4 of our 5 water treatment facilities, and we have received an incentive from the state to install some battery energy storage systems, the BESS programs, at least 3 of those solar farms. And so we've been working on that for a few years. We're actually in the installation phase right now at our Weymouth plant with the battery system. And that's, it actually really helps to shave off some of the costs related to peak hours, peak electricity use, because we can store from the solar during the day, and then we can use that when electricity gets more expensive. So it's a really good tool for our operators. It also provides some resilience, because it is some backup. There's pretty small batteries at this point, but there is always the potential to expand. And as far as the zero emission vehicles goes, the state has some regulations in place that require public agencies, I know you're subject to them as well, to commit to purchasing 50% or 50% of your vehicle purchases have to be zero emission starting this year. And then in 2027, 100%. Obviously there's a lot of flux in that market right now and uncertainty, but those regulations for public agencies are still in place, and something that, so we're approaching that through that regulatory mandate, as well as our desire to cut our greenhouse gas emissions.
One last question. Is hydrogen included as a technology renewable in your master plan?
Yeah, we don't specifically call out hydrogen anywhere in this plan, but it's certainly something that we're paying attention to and interested in. And, because Metropolitan has such a large service area, we have, hundreds of vehicles out in the desert driving long distances. It's something we're particularly interested in for that side of the service area. So yeah, we're definitely paying attention to that.
That's it, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Speak up.
That's not.
Is Don? Is that it?
Oh, thank you.
All right. Liz, thank you so much for the presentation today. It's a very important issue, so we do appreciate you coming to share it with everyone today. If there's no further questions, then we will go on to the next item, which is directors' comments and future agenda items. Director Deere?
I want to thank the lady from Met for coming up all the way down here, considering all the traffic situation there is in Los Angeles.
Oh, Liz, you're there in person, right?
I am, yes, Director Gray.
Okay, well, thank you for coming there in person. Thank you so much. Director Survive?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Any other director there?
No,
Okay. Well, again, Liz, thank you for coming to give us that very important presentation. And thank everyone for being here this afternoon. And so with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.